as a professional in the world of training or learning or education, you probably have a lot of experience with being in the front of the room and lecturing or talking about something and having everyone listen to you. Now, most of us who are trainers or teachers, whether we admit this or not, we're often in the business because we actually rather like it that people listen to us and pay attention. And there's often, even if even for non-trainers, if you're talking and no one is paying attention, it sometimes is a little uncomfortable. In this mode of learning, this ERP simulation, one of the things that will often happen, and this is starting to edge on the issue of classroom management. Our job is not to get these learners to sit in their seats and listen to us as if we were giving a sermon. That's not the intention. The intention is as quickly as possible to get them learning, active, involved, excited, to get their adrenaline moving. And people, when you're having success at that, when you're successful at getting people involved and engaged, they're not very good at sitting still in their seats and listening to what you're saying as an instructor. In fact, they are much more involved in what they're doing than what you're saying. What I often tell people is, the reason they're not listening to you is because they're too busy learning something important. And that's not to say what you're saying isn't important. I'm a trainer. I'm an instructor. I like people to listen to me as well. But the important thing is not the listening to you. The important thing is their learning. At the beginning, of course, you're kind of lecturing and telling them they need to listen. But once you get them going, you're going to find that there are times when they're so busy doing what they're doing and they're so engaged in their work, their learning work, that you want to say something and they're not going to listen to you. It's good to know this is going to happen, and it's good in advance to have a few techniques up your sleeve for how to get them to slow down and listen. Some trainers will use a bell or a buzzer. Some teachers will use some kind of attention-grabbing device. You might raise your voice. I've seen that used quite a bit. What I personally like to do is to try to put out a message to the group as quietly as I can, but I let it be known that I'm about to tell them something of extreme importance. So you let them know that, look, I want to share one more piece of information with you. I need your attention for a moment, and then they won't listen because they're too busy. And then what you basically do is you say, the next part I'm going to explain, if you don't listen to it, it's likely that you're going to have a great deal of difficulty, or it's likely that you'll be at a real disadvantage, or you might even lose the game because you haven't heard this piece of information. That's what I like to do. You'll have to find your own way of grabbing attention because there's a push and pull here, and it's quite fascinating to watch. They'll get very engaged, and you'll know that when they're super engaged, you're succeeding. But then there will come a moment when you have to stop their conversation and bring the attention back to you. They will find you an interruption, and you at that point have to find a way to bring their attention back. If you're comfortable, you can use an attention grabbing device like some kind of bell or a whistle or something. Or you can raise your voice, or you can put out some kind of statement, or you can turn a light on, or whatever it is. But if you establish those kinds of things up front, and I know for many people, for many trainers, they'll say, okay, look, it's going to get very noisy in here. I have a very small and very lovely bell, or I'm going to play a very small piece of music on my computer. When you hear that, you must immediately stop what you're doing. This is like an emergency. I need to talk to you. So you can use some kind of technique. I prefer just to say, look, this is very important. But you'll have to find your own way. But be prepared for that moment when you try to get their attention and you can't. One of the reasons why that's happening is because they're so involved, and the other reason is because something of exceptional importance in this simulation has started to work, which is the collaborative aspect. They're talking to each other. If you find you're in a group and they're not doing a lot of talking in the first couple quarters, you need to try to find ways to up the levels of conversation, communication, and collaboration. And you could just tell them, you say, look, by the way, I've noticed you guys aren't talking to each other very much. Generally, that's a sign that you're not going to do very well. The teams that talk together a lot or find ways to communicate a lot frequently and actively, they're the teams that seem to do the best. Lots and lots of communication. At the end of a quarter, when they have time to reflect, immediately they want to go and reflect on their business results. But you might ask them to say, well, look, I know you want to look at what you did, but you might also want to reflect or talk in your group about a couple of other things. Like, for example, how well did you collaborate? How well did you communicate? When you saw something, were you communicating it to others? What was your decision making like? And they'll say, well, we had a problem, we made a decision. Well, and then you say, well, look back. How was that decision made? Really think about how the decision got made. And more likely than not, someone will say something like this. Well, we saw we had a problem, and Joe over here said, why don't we try this? And we all said, yeah, that's okay, let's try that. So the first idea that came up, you tried. If you can get the group to reflect on that and say, is that the best way to do it? Might it have been better had we held back a little bit from doing and spent a little more time talking, analyzing the problem, looking at various possible alternatives, debating about which alternative might be best, and then somehow coming to a conclusion about which alternative we actually want to try, and maybe even coming up with a backup plan for in the middle of the quarter, if this hasn't happened by the middle of the quarter, we're going to try something else. There's so many things that they could do if they communicate and collaborate well. But oftentimes the default decision making will be, well, Joe had this idea and we kind of all agreed it'd be okay to try that. You want to really attempt to break that kind of cycle, the cycles of that behavior. A question I'll often ask of a team is to say, look, do you believe on your team that you're getting the absolute best thinking and best intelligence out of everyone on your team? For example, I noticed in Team A that, well, 2 people were talking a lot, but 2 other people hardly said anything. How do you know they didn't have a great idea? I mean, sometimes people will talk more and sometimes less, but, the people who talk more might have to do something to help the people who talk less. Like maybe they'll need to be quiet more. Maybe they'll need to inquire from the people who talk less. Well, what do you think? What's your opinion? They might need to start using their interpersonal skills to try to draw that other person out. You can also reinforce this by drawing people out yourself as an instructor. Or you can do it more directly by telling a team, look, let's work for a moment on seeing ways you can get your communication going. And you can begin to offer some suggestions, some interventions for how they might get communication and collaboration going better. It's an interesting thing. The more communication, collaboration you get, the louder the room gets and the more difficult it becomes for you to take back over when you need to say something. But it's part of the game. Very high levels of excitement and very high levels of communication and collaboration is what you're looking for, which means you're going to have to work hard to get them down, to get them to quiet down, so you can talk for a minute and tell them the new information. And then their excitement and enthusiasm will come back up.